right, Citi got its money, but is there enough in the TARP for other banks who need help? Joining us, Jason Goldberg, Barclays Capital Banking Analyst. Ramesh Menon, he's former head of U.S. Structured Products at Citigroup and Managed Director of Structured Investment Management. Our guest host, Mike Holland, is here as well, and on-air editor Charlie Gasparino is also here. This is a tough one to make any sense of. Jason, let me ask you: is there enough money? What is Bank America next? Is Wells Fargo next? What's going to happen?
You know, if you look in the last several months, we've taken care of Citigroup, National City, WaMu, Wachovia. So we've gotten through some of the most, troubled names. Clearly doesn't mean we're out of the woods, but I think we've made a lot of progress in terms of, kind of fixing the most troubled institutions.
Ramon?
Indeed.
Same thing? Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that, yes.
Who's next? Anybody?
Well, Joe, it's kind of a stupid question, isn't it? Is there enough money in the TARP?
What's that?
I mean, you're asking me, is there enough money? Couldn't you just literally get the government to, theoretically, put more money?
As long as we're AAA,
I think the real question is
double A.
Right. The real question is, are these other banks in the same boat as Citi, roughly? And will they will they need the government?
We now know that Citi wasn't in that bad a shape, though, right?
Well, no.
Compared to the others?
See, that's the question.
Is it, or
compare it to the others? Citigroup, relatively speaking, was okay, but that means they're all kind of not okay, and that's the problem
whole point of this segment.
Well, I know, I'm just giving you. Give me a little hassle here. It's early in the morning, but the reality is, if Citi's not that bad,
what do you got?
Thank you. Compared to everybody else, yes. Did we talk about this the other night?
Yeah, we did.
Anyway.
Come on, wingnut.
Yes, I'm a wingnut until everybody starts confirming what I'm saying.
I know we're going to talk about that.
Rubin and everybody else. But, if Citi is relatively okay compared to everybody, and everybody's kind of in the same soup, and, that's essentially what Meredith Whitney came out and said yesterday, that they're all kind of hampered by this stuff. And the real question is, and this gets to the bottom of, I think the real issue here in the markets is FAS 157. If you have to write down all these performing bonds, they are performing, most of them, right, Mike?
Yeah.
They're not all subprime, they're not all toxic, right? So if you have to write them down to the market to zero, then everybody is screwed. Then
that would be a pretty stupid idea, whoever came up with that.
Well, the government came up with it, right?
Exactly.
FASB.
But can't the people who came up with that idea get rid of that idea?
I think that is the next move. If you were to game plan this, what would you think?
You got to get rid of it. It's a lot easier than giving our taxpayer money to them.
But Charlie, even though it may have been a dumb rule to put in place to begin with, doesn't it add, there's this whole idea that we need more transparency, we need to get that. If you don't have FAS 157, if you don't have it, is there still going to be a lot of concern on the part of investors who say, I don't really know what's out there? So even if it kind of goes away, maybe...
It's not that easy to figure out, but there's got to be a less draconian way to market.
Let's go to Warren Buffett and disclosure about derivatives. If you disclose, Becky, here's a pot of stuff. We truly believe that this stuff is going to mature and it's going to be okay. And here's a pot we're not so sure. Just disclose it. But don't mark down my credit.
But a lot of people are concerned that it wasn't being disclosed properly.
Well, you can disclose
it.
Well, maybe it wasn't. You can disclose the various levels of assets.
You can disclose it, but you don't have to mark down the stuff.
But think about what we're talking. We are talking about setting a price on something where the market itself is completely illiquid and irrational.
Yeah.
So we are basically forcing every bank to mark their book to the most irrational market in the world.
I would agree with that. If you look at Citigroup, for example, they have about $13 billion in ABS, CDO, ABC exposure that's carried at 57 cents on the dollar. Yet every one of those is cash flowing positive.
How do you know that, by the way? Because everybody says there's no transparency in this, there's no way to know that. How do you know that?
You could do the numbers.
Because
if you go through the 10Q, they lay out their exposures by year and by vintage and by other metrics.
Because there's transparency, right?
Yes.
Yes. So you have to disclose it. You don't have to market.
See, that's the interesting thing here. We keep talking about transparency. It's kind of one of those words that everybody just throws around like, oh, everybody's for transparency, and there is no transparency. We take that for granted. There is a huge degree of transparency.
Smart analysts can get the information.
Although the off-balance sheet stuff at Citi was confusing, too.
It was confusing, but how do you know it was off-balance sheet?
There's still off-balance. Yeah. Ramesh, you have comments on all these issues, Ramesh?
I do, actually. I think it's important to understand that fair value accounting doesn't necessarily mean that you have to mark assets to an irrational price on the market. Fair value accounting is intended to be exactly that. the firms do have some discretion in picking a fair price or a fair value for the assets that are being held. Obviously, what constitutes a fair price can depend on what the purpose of those investments are with respect to holding. And, therein lies the opportunity to move some assets into held to term or held for investment purposes. Unfortunately, the sticking point seems to be that the audit firms are interpreting FASB's guidance far more harshly than might be required. And given that FASB isn't likely in a formal manner to loosen up what their rules are, I think there might be a need for firm management to be a little bit more aggressive in that respect.
Aren't they afraid of the SEC coming down? Mike,
yeah, they don't want to take any chances.
Exactly.
Well, the audit firms are naturally being quite careful. On the other hand, there does need to be some pushback within the existing rules and a more rational application.
Wait a second. You need the SEC to come in and say, this is how you can do it.
Yeah,
because the auditors are going to interpret this in this environment in the most draconian way because they don't want to be on the hook. So you really need the SEC, and the SEC is studying this. They're going to come out with some report at some point. From what
and Ramesh, I sit on some boards, and I can tell you, it's not in the it's not in the self-interest of the management to go against the auditors. The auditors are then going to say, well, we're going to put it into the documents that, this is our position and we disagree with you. They're not going to do that. It just isn't going to happen.
So you need the SEC essentially to come in
the SEC has to come
basically say, listen, you can market to some model, if it's performing, you can take it out. Because this is what's really destroying the banking system. The fact is, you're marking stuff that's paying to zero. And it seems like an easy fix, but I mean, maybe it's not that easy. I don't know.
Well, I do think that there needs to be a substantial basis for marking away from a market price, but I think that it's easy to argue under these conditions that market prices do not represent what the real present value of the cash flows associated with some of these holdings might be.
The problem is, but as we're talking about this, the banking system could be falling apart.
Jason, you want a last word, Jason?
No, I mean, I concur. I think, mark-to-market accounting is clearly put some of these banks at more strain than they need to be, and then we wouldn't be surprised to see changes, in the not-too-distant future.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you. Charlie, are you going to be back up here?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, yeah?
I'm going to Elaine's tonight.
You see this?